Hello, and welcome to my PERB presentation. I am so excited to share with you my experiences this past semester. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I understand FERPA and I have permission to use all of the students' pictures that you will see in this presentation. My permission form that I sent home is shown on this slide. Welcome to our classroom, room 28. I was so lucky to be able to do my student teaching in this first grade classroom at Biddeford Primary School. I had the most amazing cooperating teacher, Melissa Jolly. I was able to work with her for 3 years before student teaching with her, so we were very comfortable with each other and got along great. She was always so encouraging and supportive, and it made for an amazing experience. I loved collaborating with her and figuring out the best ways to do things for our students, and she always included me in working with the first grade team, who were also so supportive and checked in on me often. They were very valuable to bounce ideas off of. Joyelle Mears and Shalene Swan, who work in the resource room, were also two of the best people to collaborate with, ask for advice, and bounce ideas off of. I was lucky enough to be able to intern with them last semester, and having their support this semester was huge. I feel so grateful that I was able to work with this group of students as well, as they were truly the kindest group and were always so excited and willing to learn. I made amazing connections with them, and they really made my semester student teaching all that I hoped it would be. I had a few different main ways of communicating with my students' parents throughout my student teaching. In the beginning of the semester, I sent home this introduction letter to explain who I was and what my role would be in the classroom and with their children. As the semester continued, I found myself relying heavily on the Remind app to stay in contact with parents so that I could let them know about any important updates and they could message me about anything important that I needed to know or with any questions that they had. I liked it because I could easily send a quick message during the school day if I needed to, and I could send out reminders to the whole class as well. I also sent home newsletters every 2 weeks that included what was happening in the classroom, who our VIPs were, reminders, and important dates. To plan for instruction, I collaborated with my cooperating teacher to figure out the best format for planning. During my solo teaching, I ended up using the same technique that she did to plan. I put together the lesson plans for every week that are shown in the first picture. They broke each day into every part of our schedule, so I could specifically plan for every block. I used a separate planning sheet for my guided reading groups that broke down what I would do with each of my 5 reading groups for each day of the week. The planning sheet really enabled me to differentiate for each group and student depending on their needs. I also put the timeline that my cooperating teacher and I came up with on the slide because it was huge in keeping me on track for what I needed to accomplish throughout my student teaching, particularly my solo teaching. The culture of our classroom was very kind and accepting, and my students were always great at including each other and using kind words. I wanted the classroom to feel very safe for every member. On the slide, you can see one of our dance parties that we loved to have, using either Go Noodle or the Alexa to play Kids Bop or their favorite freeze dance song. I also have a picture of us doing yoga, because that was something we did to help with our breathing and to work on mindfulness, which we were big on and the students loved. We had our shared vision that we created together with the students and turned into a song, and a visual schedule to help the students know the flow of the day and what was coming next. I also included a picture of our flexible seating that we tried out at the students' tables. They loved them. Now, I'd like to walk you through a typical day in the life of my first grade students. Every morning, I would meet them at the door and greet them as they walked in. They would get all unpacked, and then, during breakfast, a lot of them would come up to me just to talk about what was going on in their lives. I valued that time, and it was huge for building and maintaining relationships. After breakfast, we had our morning meeting. During morning meeting, our VIP of the week would choose the greeting that we did, and then we would all greet each other. Our greetings were huge for teaching social skills and for helping every member of our classroom to feel included. A favorite greeting of theirs, shown in the pictures, was shoe greeting. where we all took off one shoe and the person greeting had to choose a shoe and figure out whose shoe it was. We then would do our share, which sometimes would be what they did over the weekend, something they were looking forward to, or something fun and silly like a would you rather question. After our share was finished, we would read my morning message, and the VIP would call on people to fix the mistakes in it. This was important because it helped them to recognize the mistakes they were making within their own writing. After morning meeting, we would do a go noodle, and then we would go right into their daily 5 reading groups, which had 5 stations that were 20 minutes each. The different stations we had were teacher table, work on writing, read to self, I read, and whiteboards. When I started solo teaching, we sat down as a class and came up with procedures for each station, and I wrote them down on chart paper, using picture cues to help them remember. I hung them up by each station, so that if they forgot what they needed to be doing, they could see it and remind themselves. It worked out well, because the students created these procedures with me, so they felt like they were following their own rules. I erased their names for this presentation, but I used the chart shown to write down which students were in which groups, and I then displayed it on the Apple TV, so that the students always knew where they were going next without having to ask. I used flexible seating with these groups, meaning that the groups were formed based on the students' reading levels, but when a student's reading level changed, they switched to a new group. This way, they did not stay in the same one group for the whole school year or quarter. When I started my solo teaching, I ended up assigning a daily group leader to each group, whose job was to make sure that other students in their group were doing their jobs. The students loved it and were always so excited to find out who the group leader was for the day. It really gave them a sense of respect and helped the students to engage in cooperative learning. I also brought a visual timer in for reading groups during my solo teaching, because I noticed that the students would come up to me while I was teaching my reading group to ask me how much time we had left for the station. I displayed the visual timer where they all could see it, and we talked about the procedure for it, and they really did well quietly walking up to it to see how much time was left, and then getting right back to their work. I was so proud of them. On Sunday nights, I would spend a lot of time finding reading A to Z books for each of my groups, printing them out on different colored paper for each group, and putting them all together for my students. I would then put them all into a folder for the week and base my reading group lessons off of them. At my teacher table, we did a lot of fun things. It was where I always introduced the book of the week and we read it and went over it together, but we also did a lot of fun activities that went with the books. In some of the pictures, you can see 2 of my students making different faces. They were doing that because we had just read a book about emotions, and I was calling out different emotions and having them show me what they looked like. They really had fun with that and enjoyed working together and seeing each other's silly faces, and I thought that it helped them to connect with the character in the book and understand how they were feeling. When the character felt sad, we thought of ways to improve her situation and make her happier. I also had students draw things about the book, and I did a lot of KWL charts with them, which means I wrote what they knew about the subject, what they wanted to know, and then what they learned after reading. My groups all really liked and responded well to KWL charts, as well as other graphic organizers. We also would sometimes play games, such as the Arctic Animals sight word game shown in my pictures, or games that help them work on their standards. What I loved most about Teacher Table is that the students were always able to work together, collaborate, and share ideas, and I was able to be flexible with them and work on what I thought would benefit them most. During work on writing, the students could choose to sit at their seats, our writing table with the flexible seating stools, or on the rug with a clipboard. I rotated students at the writing table to make sure that everyone got a chance. It had fun pens and markers for them to use, as well as stamps, and they loved sitting there. They did things during work on writing, such as working on their small moments in their monthly journals, working in their handwriting books, or finishing other writing work. I assigned a different activity every day. I used their monthly journals as summative assessments that went into the report cards after we clearly explained all year what they needed to earn a 3 on their writing. One day I created a challenge, where I wrote up the walrus writing worksheet that is shown in the pictures, and I had 14 mistakes within it. The students had to find all of the mistakes, and whoever found them all first from each group won a gold coin. They loved it, and it actually worked so much better than I thought it would. It kept them occupied through the whole station time, and they were very engaged with it and worked hard. I think the gold coins and the challenge worked great as motivation for them, both intrinsic, because of them feeling proud for doing well in the challenge, and extrinsic because of the prize. It also definitely helped them recognize mistakes within their own writing, which is what I was hoping for. Fridays were always Free Write Friday, so I allowed them to write letters, make lists, work in their journals, or do any other writing activity. I put new activities in the writing bin each week for them to work on. During Read to Self, the students could either sit at their seats or on the rug. They read stories either from their browsing boxes or from the themed book area in our classroom. I allowed them to either read independently or with a small group or partner, as long as they were quiet and reading the whole time. I felt as though it was important for them to be able to read with others, especially for those who struggled with reading, and I think it actually motivated them to read more. My student in the picture using the iPad did not like Read to Self, and he would always tell me, "I can't read." I would try to encourage him to look at the pictures and tell a story in his head, but he really did not like it. I ended up talking with my professor, Kristen Gorovin, and we came up with the idea of letting him use the app Epic on the iPad, which allows him to pick a story and have it read to him as he looks at the pictures. I talked with my cooperating teacher, and she thought it was a great idea, so we got him set up with it. I saw him do a complete 180 once he started using Epic, and I think it was the best accommodation that I implemented all school year. He loved Read to Self after that, and he really enjoyed being able to pick out his own books. During iRead, the students worked independently on the laptops to work on their reading skills and complete the iRead challenges to go further in their program. They liked it because they were able to see all of the rewards that they were earning as they played. I allowed them to quietly show a friend sitting next to them when they earned a reward, and they liked doing that because it made them feel proud of the work that they had done. Since teachers can monitor and check in on the students' iRead work through their own computers, it also acted as a good formative assessment to ensure that they were understanding the material. I was able to participate in a data dig where the whole first grade team used both iRead and the STAR test to assess performance, decide what their students' strengths and weaknesses were, and therefore what the students needed more practice with. The students used whiteboards during the station to practice their spelling words. We use all personalized learning, so the students each have their own binder, called a learning binder, that shows what standards they are on, what work they have completed and gotten their 3 on, which is a score that they need to level up on a standard, what sight words they know, and what spelling words they know. It has sections for both math and reading, and when they level out of a standard, they get to pick a celebration, such as time on the iPad or time visiting our sensory hall. A favorite celebration of theirs was phone call home, which is when they got to call their parents and tell them that they had leveled up. I loved it, because the students were so excited and proud, and it also gave me a chance to quickly catch up with parents and tell them about the amazing job their children were doing in the classroom. This relates to the whiteboard station, because students would get their personalized learning binders and find the section with their spelling words. They would practice them and quiz themselves and each other. They were motivated because they were hoping to move up to the next standard and choose a celebration. Sometimes during the station, I would also have them working on their Just Right bins, which are labeled bins with work and games that relate to the standard that they are on. Since their Just Right bins were filled with games, they loved playing them with their friends who were also on their standard. One standard that the students all really seemed to struggle with was syllables, and I was having trouble thinking of more activities to help them with it. One day, I talked about it with the ELL teacher that would visit my classroom, and after some collaboration, we came up with a really fun game that helps the students tremendously with syllables. We took the whole classroom to the gym and set out 4 different cones, each labeled with a number 1 through 4. The numbers represented the amount of syllables. We then had the class all line up, and the student at the front of the line would say their name. We all repeated their name and hummed it to decide how many syllables it had. Once we hummed it, we all clapped it to hear the number of syllables again. and then the student ran to the cone that represented the amount of syllables that their name had. We did it with every student, and then we did our names too, and it was so much fun. It really helped the students grasp the skill and level up on their syllable standard, which they struggled with for so long. It was also a great formative assessment because I could easily tell which students needed more practice. After reading groups, we had a short handwriting and phonics block. We devoted 2 days a week to handwriting and 3 days a week to phonics. For handwriting, they completed 2 pages at a time in their handwriting books, and when they were finished, they got to play with Play-Doh to give their fingers a break. For students who really struggled with their handwriting, I allowed them to only complete 1 page before playing with Play-Doh, as long as they were working hard. This modification was extremely helpful for those students because it helped them to feel less anxious about handwriting. I am a firm believer that what is fair is not always what is equal, and that the goal is to level the playing field for students. This idea can look different in different classrooms and with different students, but in this case, allowing certain students to complete fewer pages made learning more accessible for them. During phonics, we used the Haggerty Phonics book. We all gathered on the rug and I would read challenges from the book, such as, say the word chip. Change the ch to a sh. What word is it? And they would have to tell me ship. They became really good at these activities and loved doing them as a class, and it enabled me to give them instant specific praise and feedback. It also functioned as a great formative assessment tool because I could easily hear exactly what we needed to work on as a class. Lunch was a really fun time for us because during my solo teaching, I decided I wanted to have lunch with all of my students so that I could get to know them even more within smaller group settings and continue maintaining my relationships with them. I actually looked forward to these lunchtimes greatly. I told the students that I was picking 3 students that I saw working really hard all week to have lunch with me. I did lunch with 3 students on Thursdays and 3 different students on Fridays. I would reveal the names of the students the day before so that they could pick a theme for the lunch. I got plates and napkins that fit the theme, and they got to use them while they ate. We had themes like minions, princesses, unicorns, and more. We always watched Curious George or listened to music while we ate, and every student loved it and left with the biggest smiles on their faces. It truly made my days too. I loved seeing their smiling faces and getting to connect with them on a non-academic level. I loved the days that I had recess duty because I once again got to hang out with all of my students and we just got to play rather than having to sit and do work. I often pushed students on swings or got involved in the games that they were playing, and I really had fun. It strengthened the connections that I made with my students. When we came back in from recess, I read a story to them, and then we got right into Writer's Workshop. One of my favorite activities that we worked on during Writer's Workshop was during Dr. Seuss Week when we wrote a letter to Thing 1 and Thing 2. It was super fun. It was a fill-in-the-blank letter, and the students got to ask them their own questions and tell them things such as their favorite Dr. Seuss book. They cut it out and glued it on colored paper when they were finished, and I hung them all in the hallway. I was super impressed with how they came out, and I am glad the students had so much fun with it. We also had guest readers during this time during Dr. Seuss Week. It was really cool because we had UNE students come in as well as parents. We also spent some time during Writer's Workshop discussing Ireland. I wanted them to learn what other students in other parts of the world experience with their learning, and since I spent time in Ireland schools, I was able to use my experiences to teach them about it. I showed them pictures and we made a Venn diagram about what school is like in Ireland versus in the United States. They had a lot of fun with it and loved hearing about my trip. They used the Venn diagram that we made as a class to write about the differences between the two places. Students always had the choice during Writer's Workshop to sit either at their seats or at the rug with a clipboard. Math was trickier for me than the other subjects because we had a very short block of time and I had to learn to be a lot more flexible than I was used to, which was a very important learning experience for me. There were so many things I wanted to include, but I felt at first as though I was always on a time crunch. On Thursdays and Fridays, the students tried to level up on their math standards, so that took away 2 days that I could meet with groups because I had to be leveling up students. I ended up getting into a pretty good system with them, though, where I made sure to meet with every group at least once a week. While I met with groups, the other students were separated between doing their online math program, IXL, working in their Just Right math bins, or doing worksheets that I printed. The groups were decided by which students were on the same standard. One of my favorite days in math was the day I played Uno Dare and turned it into a math game, where they had to add the cards together before they could play their card, and if a reverse card was used, it turned to subtraction. If someone played a draw 4 card, the student either had to pick up the 4 cards or they could do one of the silly dares listed on the card. You can see in the pictures how hard the students were laughing, and it made me so happy as we had a lot of fun and they improved their math facts. Occasionally, I decided to do whole group math lessons as well. One of the pictures shows the day that I used a big cube and wrote math facts on it, and we tossed it around the circle. When a student caught the cube, they had to solve the math fact that their thumb landed on. They really enjoyed it since they got to play a fun game, and it was perfect because I was able to listen to their answers and use it as a formative assessment to see where they were at with their math facts. Dismissal was pretty tough for me at first. It was one of the craziest times of the day, and we never seemed to have enough time to get everyone packed and eating snack before the buses were called. My cooperating teacher tasked me with the challenge of figuring out a solution for dismissal during my solo teaching, so I put a lot of thought into it. I collaborated with her on the idea of making laminated dismissal checklists and taping them to their desks, and she loved the idea. I ended up making them and getting them ready for when the kids came in, and I used our math block one day to explain how they worked and to talk about the new system. If the students were sitting, packed up, and had every item checked off, they would raise their hand and I would put a star on their checklist, and then they could start their snack. If the students could get 4 stars by the end of the week, they got a small prize, such as an eraser or a sticker. I was impressed and pleasantly surprised with how quickly they picked up on the new procedure, and it made for a way less stressful dismissal time. The students were more relaxed as well, and they were always so excited to show me that they had checked off everything on their checklist. We even got to a point where we had extra time and were able to play Kids Bop during snack, which we all loved. I did my unit on Arctic animals. The goal for the unit was for them to create their own Arctic animal fact book. We started the unit with penguins. I explained that penguins are not really Arctic animals, but that it was a fun way to start, especially since I love penguins and they already knew a lot about penguins. Before I even began teaching about them, I asked the students to help me create a list about what they knew already about penguins, which enabled me to activate their prior knowledge about the subject. They compiled a lot of great facts, and after some prompting from me, they even told me about how penguins have blubber and what the blubber does for them. They were excited about it. So we did an experiment where we used a blubber glove to see if the blubber would keep their hands warm in a bucket of snow. They decided it did and drew a picture of the experiment, as well as writing a sentence about it. After our experiment, we really got into the unit, and we started off by watching a live camera of penguins at an aquarium. After that, we listened to the I'm a Penguin song and read some fact books about penguins. We learned in the books that there were different types of penguins, and that the emperor penguin was the tallest. So we then did an activity where we put up a life-sized picture of an emperor penguin, which stands at 4 feet tall. The students measured themselves against the penguin, and then used mini penguin pictures to graph on a chart whether they were shorter, taller, or the same height as an emperor penguin. We all had a lot of fun with that activity. I worked with small groups to write a page about penguins, using facts that we had come up with on an anchor chart after reading the penguin books. From there, we dove right into Arctic animals. I did 1 Arctic animal a week. I chose to teach polar bears, walruses, and narwhals. The narwhals were a big favorite for all of them. We always started by reading a book about the animal, then watching a National Geographic video about it. From there, we created a can-have-are anchor chart with what the animal can do, what it has, and what it is. After that, we got into the writing. I worked on the writing in whole groups to get them started, especially with the earlier animals, where we picked out facts and made sentences together. Gradually, they started to do the writing on their own. They struggled because writing is hard for a lot of them, but I conferenced with small groups about the writing a few times a week to help them, and they ended up doing a really great job with it. For some students, such as my ELL students, I sat with them and verbally reminded them of some of the facts that we talked about. Once they chose one, we sounded it out together, and I helped write key words on a sticky note to help them as they wrote their sentences. Some highlights from the unit was when we wanted to see how long a narwhal was. We read that narwhals were 16 feet long. So we chose 4 students who were the same height as an emperor penguin, since we still had our graph up and we knew the emperor penguin was 4 feet tall, and we had them lie down across the floor. It was so cool and the students loved it. They were amazed by how long a narwhal was. We also wanted to see how long walruses' tusks were. We read that they could be 3 to 4 feet long. So we used 2 students who were shorter than the emperor penguin and had them stand side by side to see what a walrus's 2 tusks would look like. We also watched a live stream for polar bears, which the students loved seeing, and it really helped to connect us with the world and see what the polar bears' environments look like. Once the unit was finished, the students had a really cool Arctic animal book, complete with pictures and a table of contents, which I used as a summative assessment. There were a few different classroom reward systems that we used. Every week, we had a new VIP. Our VIP was chosen based on who was a great role model for the other students the week before. The VIP got to be the line leader, help with calendar and morning meeting, and choose our morning greeting every day. I also implemented a few classroom management strategies during my solo teaching. The first thing that I did during my solo teaching was I created a ticket holder for each student, and for the students that were doing an amazing job in the hallway, I would give them 1 ticket for their ticket holder. 5 tickets at the end of the week could be exchanged for 1 gold coin. The students ended up receiving a lot of compliments for how quiet they were in the hallway, and they were super proud of themselves. I also handed out certificates, as shown in the picture, at the end of every week for students who had either done a great job with their work or with following directions that week, or who had done something super kind. I made a huge deal of presenting with their certificates in front of the class, and they always felt so accomplished and were so proud. I made sure that the certificates went right into their folders to go home, so that their parents could see what a great job that they did. As a class-wide reward, I put a secret message on the board that said Movie Day. They could unlock 1 letter a day if they had done a great job as a class, and once they unlocked all of the letters and saw that it said Movie Day, we had a fun movie day with pajamas and popcorn. The last thing I did that was a huge hit was I created a classroom treasure box. Our treasure box was filled with all kinds of cool items. I noticed that the students really struggled at first during their reading stations because it was a huge block of time that they needed to stay focused for. So I discussed with one of the special education teachers what options I had to help them to be successful, and she helped me come up with the treasure box idea. To help them stay motivated, I created the treasure box and explained to them that each group needed 4 stars by the end of the week to earn the treasure box. I put each group on the whiteboard with each group member's name and made a big show of putting the stars on the board at the end of reading stations for the groups that had earned it. The deal was that every single group member had to be doing their jobs or no one in the group earned the star for the day. That is why the group leaders really helped, because they kept everyone on task. Holding everyone accountable really helped the students to stay responsible. We had a lot of super fun days during this semester. Some of the days shown in these pictures are our movie day, where I also did an art project with small groups at the back table. It was right before Groundhog Day, so we made groundhog masks out of paper plates, which was super fun. You can see how excited they were to hold up their masks for the picture. We also had Career Day, where you can see one student was a teacher and another wore a wig because they want to be a hairdresser. The students also came up with a long list of careers that they knew about, and we discussed what each career entailed. They then worked on a worksheet where I printed the pictures of them in their Career Day outfits, and the students glued them to their papers and wrote about the career that they chose. These pictures are from Career Day, Valentine's Day, and our 100th day. Our Valentine's Day party was super fun, and I had a lot of smiling faces. I loved seeing the students get so excited about all of their Valentines. The 100th day was one of my favorite days all year. My students and I got to dress like 100-year-olds. We spent the day doing super fun activities, such as making 100-day crowns and sharing the 100 objects that they had brought in, and we even used an app to make us look 100. We all laughed and had so much fun. Here are just a few more pictures that I wanted to show that I think really reveal all of the fun we had and show the happy, kind culture of our classroom. I wanted to include a slide about remote learning because it has been a huge part of this semester. Unfortunately, it has been a few weeks now since I have been in the classroom with my students, which has broken my heart. However, I am so grateful that we have the technology that we do so that I can still connect with them, see their faces, and hear their voices. I have been able to be in communication with my cooperating teacher often, and we have been able to do 2 morning meetings a week through Zoom to check in with the students and do activities with them. Remote learning looks a lot different than the learning that we are used to in the classroom, but the goal has still been to help the students to learn, grow, and most importantly, feel safe. We have a Facebook page where we have been communicating with parents and students, and I have been posting daily read-alouds for them. I post challenges for them to do that go along with the book I read, which they seem to enjoy. For example, I read the monster at the end of this book, and I asked them if they had any ideas for how Grover could keep us from turning pages, because he did not want us to get to the end of the book. I also found Legos that are used for reading and math that I have been able to record lessons with. I love them because it shows the students how they can use blocks or Legos that they have at home to learn in a fun way. Biddeford Primary School also put together a slideshow for the students with all of the teachers making signs saying how much they miss them. I was able to be a part of the slideshow, and I was so happy to be involved with it and to be able to do that for the students. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my PERB presentation. I want to take this time to thank all of my amazing professors, my supervisor, my cooperating teacher, my peers, and everyone at Biddeford Primary School, as I could not have gotten this far or gotten through this crazy end of the semester without you all. I have loved student teaching so much, and I miss being at the school every day.